So thank you very much, Eli, for flying in this morning for this fireside chat. Just arrived, and it's like a dream, you told me before, to be here with all the colors and the people and so on. So Eli is maybe the most interesting person in media business these days. He created something which is maybe the fastest growing media asset in history. I'm not sure if it's really true. It's hard to measure, but there are people measuring things, and they tell us that UpWorthy, the site that Eli and his colleagues created, is the fastest growing site with something like 80 to 90 million unique users in November, and which is something, so if you compare it to the New York Times, which is something like 30, and BuzzFeed maybe something like 130. So, and you did that in 2 years, which is kind of crazy. And they are doing this basically with things like that. So there's one of the kind of headlines UpWorthy is creating. And what you have to know about Eli before we start is that he's been an activist on the net, so he's one of the key persons at Move On, a big platform for kind of progressive projects, raising money and stuff like that. And he's also the author of The Filter Bubble you all have read. So the book claiming that the more the net develops, the more kind of individualized the information you get on the internet, the more you get filtered, so you don't get, well, all the information, you don't get what the Wall Street Journal is doing, but you get just a little slice of the real information on the net. So this is a kind of interesting story. And when we start, we should explain. So I realized that, at least in Germany, UpWorthy isn't that well known. Maybe we click on your headlines all day, but it's not. I'm not sure if everyone's aware of the mechanics behind UpWorthy. So I'm showing just, so these are the typical headlines of UpWorthy, and they are going around the planet. It's usually something like a 2-sentence headline. It's very emotional, and there's something special about it because it's kind of, you try to spread meaningful, important content. And this headline, for example, I think it's one of the most clicked headlines. Something like 17 million people read this item until today. How do you do that?
So, you know, UpWorthy is basically media for people who haven't totally given up on the world. That's kind of our little niche. Is if you are completely cynical and nihilistic, we're not for you. But if you have some little shred of hope, we try to feed that shred a little bit. We really started from the point of view that when people think about shareable content, you know, that there was a good category in kind of funny videos to share, entertaining stuff, but that there was this whole other category which was passion-driven media, and it was basically things that people share because they want to lift up a topic or they want to lift up a cause and share it with their friends. And so, you know, when we started, we said, let's actually curate the very best of those kinds of pieces of media that were compelling and also and stirred people's, you know, excitement, and also were about something really meaningful and important. And let's see if we can actually kind of demonstrate that there's a big community of people who want to do that. And you know, we've been totally blown away by how big that community is. It's you know, I was sort of hopeful that there were a few million people out there that wanted to make their social feeds a little bit more meaningful. Seems like there's a lot more than that. But it really starts with you know, tapping into people's desire to lift up topics that matter to them. And then I think, you know, so that's the first ingredient. Second ingredient would be just being really, really careful about which videos and which pieces of content we curate. Most sites publish, you know, thousands of things a month. Some publish tens of thousands. We publish about 260 things a month. And we really focus on never hitting publish unless we think that what we're sharing with our community is something that's truly excellent. And then, I think the third piece is just the community that's developed around this, and that's, we now have 7 million kind of core subscribers, and those people help kind of get it out in front of a lot more people online.
And what happens is this, by the way, you know this chart? I stole it from The Atlantic, I think, and they stole it from your website. So this is the, and you stole it from a blog analyzing the social interaction of different media. And what you see here is, Atlantic called it a skyscraper in the desert. So this is the average interaction with a piece of content on these different media outlets. And you have something like 75,000 kind of usual likes and shares and stuff like that. And the next one, like, I don't know, so BuzzFeed is something like 10 to 13 times less interaction. So there's something else, I think, behind. So what's the technology side, for example, of UpWorthy? Is there something special? You do a lot of testing. It's not A/B testing, it's A to Z testing, maybe?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we have a whole technology sort of optimization platform that helps us really sort of philosophically. We come to this stuff with the feeling that people in media often spend a lot of time making something great, and then very little time thinking about how it finds its audience. And so from the beginning, we said, okay, our editorial ethos is going to be no great speeches to empty rooms. Like if it's worth doing the speech, it's worth actually packing the audience, in there. And that led us to develop these tools so that our curators could actually see very quickly whether people were interested in what they were publishing or not. And that's both the headlines, but it's also the actual content. Are people actually, spending time with this piece of content, or are they kind of clicking in and going, oh, this isn't really interesting to me, I'm gonna go somewhere else. And so, and then the third thing that we look at is, are people actually sharing it? Are they willing to put their name behind the content with all of their friends? And if they're spending a lot of, if they're clicking in large numbers, and they're spending a lot of time with it, and they're willing to take it out to their friends, that's a pretty good sign, I think, that it's something that's actually, a very high quality piece of content. And so, what we've done on the tech side is just help bring all of those metrics, to be very visible to our curators so that they can tell and learn very quickly. And what we found is that, there's a sort of 3 to 4 month learning process where we see curators get better and better as they, sort of like a comedian going on the road and playing in, a small town in Duluth before you go to New York City and play for Radio City Hall. And you see what the audience is laughing at, and you see what people are responding to. That's what we're trying to provide for folks, on our site.
But the crazy thing is, you wrote this book about the filter bubble, and you created your own feel-good filter bubble. So do you like that? Is it okay for you?
So the filter bubble really was a, my biggest concern in the filter bubble was that in an era of algorithmic filtering, where sites like Facebook were, deciding which content to show, that that there was a danger that worthy, important topics would get lost. And, and that sort of information junk food that's not very nutritious, that doesn't actually sort of feed your soul, but that is very clickable, sort of triumphs. And, part of what's going on right now is that it used to be that content about worthy topics just got its own natural lift from editors and producers, and they would put it on page 1, or they would lead the nightly news with it. And that's how, the big report about climate change or about, some other issue would reach a mass audience. Now that stuff has to compete with everything else in the Facebook news feed, right? And those big reports have to compete with photos of lunch and, pictures of toddlers and everything else that's going on in social media. And so, UpWorthy actually sort of came for me directly out of that critique, which was, it's kind of lame just to say that, can we actually do something to help people lift up content about those important topics in a way that works in the social era.
But what if it's not, you know, shareable and likable and friendly? If it's abstract and complex and you need 2 pages in the Wall Street Journal to describe it? So you don't share classical journalistic article stuff, don't you? It's mainly videos and...
Yeah. And I should say, like, we don't consider ourselves journalists. I think we do a really great job of curation. We don't pretend to know, you know, how to do an in-depth investigative report. And, you know, I think the service that we provide is, you know, there are a couple billion, you know, videos uploaded every week or maybe every day now. And it's totally overwhelming. How do you find the substantive ones that really are truthful, are compelling, and are something that you're going to want to share? To me, you know, that's actually kind of, I think there's been this long-standing treatment of important topics that's kind of dry and dour, and people in the journalism world even refer to kind of Brussels sprouts, right? You have to sort of give people little treats and then they'll eat their Brussels sprouts, and the Brussels sprouts is the important stuff. And I just sort of feel like, why does that stuff have to taste horrible? Why can't we make it taste good and make it more fun and interesting and compelling to learn about important topics? And I think, you know, some of my favorite pieces of content really do that. So we have a 6-minute video breaking down the U.S. healthcare system that is just, you know, as fact-based and as detailed as anything you might find in the Wall Street Journal, but it's told in this very compelling way, and 5 million people watched it. You know, and that's a win to me. That's so exciting because it's really hard to get people to pay attention to what's wrong with the healthcare system.
There are several Tumblr blogs trying to find out where you are lying in your headlines. There are Twitter accounts spoiling your headlines and stuff like that. Can you live with that? That you're a liar, ugly liar. And so if you click on it, it's something totally different. This is the BuzzFeed feeling, you know. So did you create a good BuzzFeed, or is it something
Well,
else?
I mean, we love BuzzFeed, but you know, our mission really is to, I mean, we started from the point of view of a mission to lift up the most important content in a way that lots and lots of people would get interested in it. And virality for us really was a tool to advance that mission. We're only as interested in virality as it helps us achieve that end. And the way that we think about, you know, whether we're being successful or not is really in terms of awareness. So I think, you know, this is sort of an implicit metric for a lot of media companies. Are we driving awareness to this worthy issue or that worthy issue? I think, you know, media companies don't often talk in these terms, but certainly if you said, well, what's the point of publishing, you know, the Snowden papers? Part of the point there is to make a lot of people aware of what is going on in the NSA, so that then there's some kind of political consequence. And the political consequence is outside of the domain of the media, but driving awareness is important. So for us, you know, awareness becomes the key metric. And the way that we measure that is through a metric that we've developed that's called attention minutes. And attention minutes is just what it sounds like. It's how many minutes are people spending engaged with this piece of content. On an average day in December, we were driving about 5 million attention minutes a day. And this is all with content. You know, we don't allow any celebrity slideshows on the site. We don't allow any kitten videos. Every single thing that we post has to actually be substantive in some way. To me, you know, that's really exciting. And it's not a journalistic approach, but it accomplishes some of the same ends that I think journalism at its best does, which is making a large group of people aware of what's really going on in the world.
Is there something like a major change in the ecosystem of the internet at the moment? So you have this debate in the US at least for half a year or something. Facebook changed something in their algorithms, and just now we are realizing this in Germany, that someone pulled a trigger, whatever, and suddenly we get factors of Facebook traffic than before, and lots of likes, and there seems to be an editorial team working hard on pushing media websites. And I talked to them recently, and they tell me that BuzzFeed and your venue, they are quality sites for them, and they want to kind of push them. But aren't we running in the same debate as with Google years before? So we have this kind of monopoly of traffic, which is Facebook now, which changes the whole market of news and kind of serious reporting and stuff like that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you can't overstate at this moment in time the power that Facebook has to drive attention and drive people places. And I think it's worth noting, I think in circles like these, we all love Twitter. We use Twitter a lot. But at a mass level, Twitter is orders of magnitude off from Facebook. So I don't know if this statistic is still exactly right, but it's directionally right. About 2 minutes per American per month on Twitter versus 7 hours per American per month on Facebook. So Facebook does have this enormous power. The way that we think about that, the hopeful or the benign interpretation is Facebook's really going to be thinking about what makes Facebook users happy and want to stick around on Facebook. And I think that's high quality content that people love when they see it, that they spend time with, and that they then want to bring out to their friends and their friends want to have a conversation about. And if you're Facebook, that's what looks good to you because it's a back and forth with the media that's driving people back to the site. And I think that's actually really good for those of us who are doing content because it forces us actually to up our game in some important ways. I think we have to pay attention to whether users are actually satisfied by the stuff that we're publishing on a piece-by-piece basis. And if we can provide highly satisfying content, and what I mean by satisfying is you click in, you get engaged, you spend some time there, and you ideally want to talk about it, that's a good thing. We should be doing more of that.
At the end, it's a feel-good bubble. So my fear as a journalist is that people tend to share nice things. Mm-hmm. This is core of your success, isn't it? So if it's complex and ugly and boring, but important, so we need you as a consultant to kind of communicate these things. But isn't it changing? So the last race was like, we have to be indexed and we have to be fast to be on Google News. Now we have to be likable and nice.
I don't think it's feel good. If you look at the top things that we've published, the video, the one-tacular headline that you talked about, that was a 20-minute video about cancer. That's not feel good. It's 20 minutes with a dying kid, it does talk about the end of his life in a totally compelling way, but it's grappling with something serious and real. I think again the healthcare video that I spoke of. There's no sense in which it's feel good. It's about how our healthcare system in the United States is a total disaster. It's depressing from that standpoint, right. But it's compelling, and I think. I think there are two things at work. One is it's definitely a storytelling bubble. It's one in which we say stories, telling compelling stories, we believe is the way in to having a conversation about these policy issues. And I think a lot of the time, incredibly important, worthy topics get discussed in a very dry, factual way that leaves most people just, tuning out. And I think that's a problem. I think that's actually a flaw in our ability to drive important things. But I think the second piece is I think our point of view isn't everything's going to be fine. It's you don't need to read every article about something important and despair. And I think actually with a lot of the really important journalism that I read. You get to the end of the article and you think, well, we're just screwed. And I don't think that's very helpful. I don't think that creates the kind of dynamic between media and citizens that you want. It doesn't leave people saying, what can I do about this? It leaves people saying, well, I'm going to shrug and go on to hopefully more fulfilling, more satisfying, content that will give me something that I can do something with.
Okay. Since this is DLD, fireside chats tend to be in light speed. So 2 last questions. Yeah. We don't talk too much about business models in the next hour, but what's your business model again?
So that's the billion-dollar question. Our business model, and we're still in very early stages, but it's basically, to turn this ability to drive attention to important topics and allow people to underwrite that with regard to specific topics. So we're doing a project with the Gates Foundation right now that's about global health, and we're trying to kind of take this engine and drive it toward what is undoubtedly one of the great moral questions of our time, but one that almost never gets covered, in the media.
Are you paid by views of Bill and Melinda, or is it?
It's a whole suite of, we don't want to be paid by views. We want to be paid by our people actually organically sharing this content, starting conversations about it. To me, that's how culture changes, okay. And that's the thing that we may be able to offer to people on important topics.
Okay, last questions. We are changing places. You will stay around in the audience. Maybe we have questions for you for the next panel, which is about journalism. Any recommendations for news outlets like the New York Times, Washington Post, with the knowledge you have now? So we have the problem, we want to drive our audience to the important topics, which are, if they are important, most of the time they're a little boring. So for example, it's hard to kind of get people engaged when it comes to the NSA or stuff like that. Any recommendations for us?
I mean, I would say it does start with, in the Times I know in particular, there's actually a firewall between people and metrics. And I kind of understand on one level where that comes from, but on another level, it just seems sort of like if you don't allow people to learn what journalists, what pieces are actually engaging people and what pieces are not, then you never get better. And so to me, that would be the place I would start is, have a conversation that's not about, how do we dumb everything down, or how do we, just sort of put this through a meat grinder, but where are the places where we're actually being successful in driving, in driving lots of attention to something that matters, and how do we do more of that? And to me, that's sort of, it's not about changing everything. It's about actually learning from the audience about what's working there. And I think what you find, if you look at the Times' most viewed pages, it's not a bleak picture, right? It's not like just the sort of here's how to make better ravioli, articles on the Times were the top pages. A lot of the best journalism of the year was some of the most viewed. So why is that, and how do you do more of that? Rather than the sort of page A17, very dry write-up that feels like it's a service, but no one's actually listening.
Okay. Thank you very much, Eli.
Thank you.
So Eli stays in the audience.